Hello and welcome back to the Master of None podcast. I am your host, Stephen Murphy. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I have a special guest on the podcast tonight. It is Ciaran O'Sullivan. Ciaran is the head coach of the Irish American football team, also known as the Wolfhounds. Ciaran, thanks very much for joining us. How are you?
I'm very good, Stephen. Thank you.
How's life at the moment for you? Obviously, it's strange times for everyone at the moment. How are you dealing with it?
Same as everybody else, following the advice being given by, the appropriate authorities and kind of park the whole sport side of things for, the foreseeable future and just keeping an eye on, when we can get back to normal life and get back to our hobbies, really, to be honest.
I know you don't realize how much sport is a part of your life until it's taken away, isn't it? It's amazing.
Oh, it's absolutely true, yeah. Um,
I was. It's a bad sign, but I used to wake up every morning. I'd check, my Twitter or my Instagram for sport highlights. Um, so it's probably better that I get out of that habit, but it just shows you how much a part of it is your life it becomes. But so Kieran, yeah, look, as I said to you off privately there, I will attempt. I'll take this basically as I feel like a lot of people are like myself, as in I follow the NFL. I have done for years now, but I didn't even know Ireland had a national team up until recently. So I wanted to kind of do basically a contrast of, because when you think of the NFL, you think, bright lights and it's superstars and millionaires, and obviously that's not the case when it comes to lower level and national level. So we'll talk a bit about you, your background, and then I have a few questions I want to ask. And actually, I put up on my Twitter if anyone had any questions. So a few questions come in, so I'll run them past you as well towards the end. But I'll start with you, Kieran. So how did you get into American football? Did you play when you were younger, or?
I think pretty much the same way as you just described for yourself. No, it was a bit different back in the 80s, but RTE and Channel 4 ran highlight shows, highlight packages of the NFL once a week. So they'd show extensive highlights of one game and then sort of, the edited highlights of other games. And, it was just, there wasn't that much sport on television anyway. So this was just an easy introduction, a very slick production, and it got a lot of people interested in the sport. And in the 90s, I relocated to America, and of course, that gave me an introduction to football at all different levels. So
Okay.
high school, college, and NFL as well.
And whereabouts did you relocate to in America?
Well, I lived in Maine for a time, and also in Connecticut. Um, so right up in the north, kind of wintry, mountainy Maine, and closer then to New York City, just outside sort of the extended suburbs of New York City, if you like, on my second trip over.
And did you play when you were over there, Kieran?
No, it's one of the really bizarre things about American football, and even a lot of other sports in America, is the formal sports they're not played like in general. So you don't have like American football clubs the way we would have GA clubs, soccer clubs, or rugby clubs that would provide an outlet for all levels of players. It's basically organized in school, high school, college, and then the NFL. And there are some semi-professional leagues that are based around sort of your different occupations. So you'd have like sort of fire and emergency services leagues and things like that. And the military would have their own, but there isn't kind of an opportunity to play American football recreationally in America. So it was purely as a spectator over there.
Why do you think that is, Kieran? Is it just the physicality of it, or is the amount of, because the Gaelic, you bring a pair of boots and a pair of shorts and you can play. Obviously, that's not the case with American football. You need, your pads, your helmets, it's a bit different.
Well, it's kind of how all sport is played in America. So it's something that kind of was in Irish schools and colleges for a while, where the sport was a big part of it, and it's kind of being taken out of the curriculum now. But in American high schools and juniors, highs and so on, you have these fantastic sporting facilities, and everybody has an opportunity to play sports. And it's not just American football. There would be soccer, baseball, softball, athletics, gymnastics, wrestling. Um, it's a big part of the education system over there. And American football started in the education system. It was the Ivy League colleges took basically what was rugby and evolved it into American football. So it's never been very far away from the education system, and that's where it's set up, and it's really organized. It's the participation level at high school is massive. It narrows down when you get into college, and then obviously the peak of the pyramid is the NFL. And outside of that, you don't get very much participation in for adults in the sport. There just isn't the structure there for it.
It's strange, well, because American football is America's #1 sport. You think that there would be, I think everybody will be playing it at some stage, which is strange.
Well, it's what we'd see as their #1 sport, but if you look at some of their other sports, so like by participation again, soccer is probably their biggest sport. Soccer is huge in high schools and colleges. We don't see it because we only get sort of their major league soccer, which really hasn't taken off over here. It's just something to watch when the Premier League is over or whatever. But there are their sports are huge, and we would think that there would be a kind of a similar model that we'd have in our rugby, our soccer, and our Gaelic games, that people would have an opportunity to participate. But it's not really the case in a lot of sports. It's, obviously soccer and baseball and softball lend themselves to kind of summer recreation leagues, and you find a good deal of participation in those. But then again, the commitment and time it takes to be involved in American football doesn't lend itself to a sort of recreational kind of hobby approach, if you like.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when you were over there, Ciaran, then did you get involved with a team? Did you start your coaching there?
No, I actually coached handball here in Ireland before I went over, and the sport I took to, as I said, I like to play sports, and I already spoke about baseball and softball, and they were the sports that I kind of gravitated towards when I was over there, just because you couldn't break into American football. But there were a couple of things that was happening. So one thing was, where I lived, there was a massive rivalry. There were two towns on either side of a river. One was Winslow and one was Waterville. If it was anywhere else, they'd be the one town. But these two towns had a real rivalry between their high schools. And I mean, they played in the dead of winter. It was seriously hard-nosed football, tough football, and it really mattered. It was as good a derby as you would find in any sport here. So if you think of, the bitterest GAA rivals at club level, it was right up there with that. And that was fantastic because, you get a little bit homesick for that sort of environment.
Yeah.
It was
a bit of intensity.
And the other thing then that happened was at Thanksgiving, we'd get together, and there was before, football would be a big part of Thanksgiving in the afternoon and the evenings. That's what the family would sit down and watch. And there was a game played where everybody would put down $5, and you'd have to call out the penalty before it was announced, and you'd win the pot. And so I became quite good at that. So I learned the rules through, I guess, gambling. I became
we don't advocate that here.
No, it's not. I know, but it was a kind of a friendly thing where it just made it a bit more interesting when there's a break in the game. It's a very tough game to watch with all the starting. Yeah. And back then, the analysis wasn't the same as you have now, so you weren't getting in-depth coaching or and breakdowns in between plays. So there was plenty of time to kind of make the calls and see who get the call right. So it was an interesting education, I must say. So that was my involvement in American football in America.
That's because when watching the games here, sometimes it's very tough to call the penalty. So that's actually probably is a great way to learn the rules, because a lot of the small intricate stuff is what puts people off sometimes. So that's actually fascinating enough. Yeah. So you returned home, Ciaran, obviously at some stage, and you set up the Cork Admirals. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I came home and I was involved still in softball here, and one of my teammates, John Stokes, playing softball. The season ends in the summer, at the end of summer and autumn, and we were just saying how good it would be to, Thanksgiving is coming up, and how good it would be to see an actual football game live, because both of us used to attend games live when we were in. He lived in the States as well, and so I made a phone call to. Again, the internet wasn't huge at the turn of the last millennium, so I made a phone call to the association, and I asked, was there, I really want to go see a game. Is there any way I could get to see a game this Thanksgiving? And the man at the other end of the phone basically told me, if you want to see a game, you got to start a team. And it's like, yeah, that makes sense. The only way to see a game is to. So I went back to John, and we decided that that's what we do, and we set up the Cork Admirals.
And can I ask what goes into setting up a team?
Commitment, a massive amount of commitment. So to be fair, to John and I, kind of, as I said, we've been involved in softball, which was a minority sport. So we had a good grounding in, sort of how to get publicity and how to attract players, and what needed to be set up in insurance and the rest of it. So we just set about, and we decided to advertise that we weren't setting up a team, but that we were just looking for players, almost like we had the team already set up. So we picked everything: the name, the colours, where we were going to train, the whole lot. And we just put out like this advertisement that Cork Admirals are looking for players, if you're interested in American football. And people came down, and I think our first meeting we had 9 people at it, which was a little bit disappointing. But we said, look, we've got a decision to make. If we can either say, look, this isn't working, or the 9 of us can work and push on from here. And everybody contributed and got us over the initial hurdles of getting more people involved, getting buy into the league, playing our first games, getting equipment, getting money is huge. So it was kind of like the 9 first people made a huge difference. They all got on board with the vision that we had, and understood where we came, that we weren't pulling the wool over anybody's eye at that point. And we had something that was, we felt marketable and would get people on board. And that proved the case. The team is still going today.
And what was the time frame from kind of starting up to actually getting a team together and, actually into a league?
Well, we would have started in late 2000, and we would have been playing in 2002. So
not overnight.
Oh no. I mean, again, just with everything, there comes a caveat with American football that it isn't soccer, it isn't even hurling. It's a very physical and potentially dangerous game. So you don't go out and see, will we like it? You kind of prepare yourself for the actual game itself as best you can, and then you participate at a level that's suitable for everybody. So our first games would have been 8-a-side games with variants in the rules, and that was kind of a stepping stone, and then we would have progressed on into the leagues going forward. And it took maybe a year involved in the league before we got our first win. Even though we were competitive against other teams, some of the best teams would just absolutely wipe the floor with us, and that's understandable. They'd have been around a lot longer than us. They had bigger squads. They had been more prepared. But it's patience, commitment, and step-by-step approach.
And did you take the head coach role of the Cork Admirals at that stage?
No, my involvement in it was defensive coordinator. So John and I divided up responsibilities because there wasn't anybody else there to do it. I coached in baseball, softball. I'd even coached in America, and handball. And so I kind of turned towards I naturally gravitated towards defense. And we just got to a point where when I was coaching the defense that I was actually getting more involved in the plays myself or being on the field myself. And one of the guys who played a little before, there was a team in Cork previously that had a short existence, but we had some players from there who came over in the initial 9. And Chris Gaughan, one of those players, just told me, you need to be in pads. You can't stay out on the sideline anymore. And so then that's when I transitioned to being a player with responsibility for the defense as well.
So what position did you play, Ciaran?
Linebacker.
Oh, were you laying in some big hits?
I was laying out some low hits. I'm not the tallest or the biggest. But everybody folds at the knees. They're designed to fold.
Yeah.
So I was playing in that. I was playing at that level on the field. So yeah, it was tough. And you talk to people from that era, and they called it old school. And it was the trenches, and it was a very different sport back then to be involved in. So it was tough.
And did you play for long, Ciaran?
I played up to 2005. So that would have been my last game would have been in 2005. So it would have been 4 years, I guess. Playing.
Long enough in American football terms.
Well, long enough as well for someone in my advanced years. I mean, it didn't come to it as an 18-year-old. You saw my beard. There's plenty of grey in it, and I was pushing on at that point and probably pushing it a little bit. But it was very enjoyable. I loved it. I took to the game very much. Had a great experience with the people I played with at the time and our opponents at the time, and it was fantastic, and it was a great grounding and education in the sport as well.
Yeah, I would just before we move on, I would just like to reiterate, Ciaran has a majestic beard. If anyone has the pleasure of meeting him, you will see it. But incredible. But sorry, I just wanted to digress into that for a second. Was it a steep learning curve then, Ciaran, from going, like controlling being a defensive coordinator? Did you find it tough to kind of master that?
I kind of gravitated towards it a lot. Somebody, like, you can't, with defense, you don't know what's coming, so you have to be prepared for everything. And you still have to have a realistic approach that you can't actually prepare for everything. So you kind of find a nice median, and I was good at organizing that. So I kind of took to it very well. In the earlier years of, my coaching career, I would have traveled to coaching conventions in the UK and in Europe to try to pick up as much. I really took it seriously, educated myself as best I could. Again, there were limited resources. We didn't have the internet that's available now, and we didn't have the resources, and even the information being passed forward on Sky from all these wonderful coaches they get to analyze games, that wasn't available to us. So it was a case of going out and finding it. Finding the information, and I loved that. I just took to it, and I don't know, I just have a skill set, I guess, that allowed me to excel at it as well. So I started putting out some really mean defenses, and that kind of got me noticed, I suppose.
And obviously, it's one thing to think of these schemes and these plays, but is it easy then to translate that to your defense, your players on the pitch?
If I say yes, it's going to sound arrogant, and if I say no, it's going to make my players.
Look, Ciaran, yeah. Sometimes you have to give yourself praise,
But like, I just found ways of doing it. Some of the other sports that I was involved in coaching, and some of the coaches that I've had would have shown me how to break things down into functioning, coachable segments, and you try to get through as many of them as you can and build a strong a picture as you can with all these different segments. And that approach really helped. As I said, the tuition from the British American Football Coaches Association, BAFCA, over there in the UK, and some of the American coaches who travel over and do seminars was just fantastic. And so I had a lot of guidance in it on how to break it down. And we weren't, like, even though it was a new sport to us in Cork, we didn't go out and reinvent the wheel. There was defenses out there that we could work with and adapt. And other people had coached these and had installed these defenses. And then I have to say, I was just so lucky with the players I've worked with all through my coaching career. They've been absolutely fantastic. And it's easy to build a good rapport. And the final part of the puzzle, I suppose, is that having played in the linebacker position in the defense, you kind of get an understanding, a picture of where you are on the field, sort of what's happening in front of you, what's happening behind you. You're both playing run defense and you still have to be involved in the pass defense. So you get an overall view. And being on the field then, you know, in some of these older, old school games as well, players understood that you knew what they were going through and that you wouldn't ask them to do anything that you haven't done yourself. So, yeah, all those things come together and you end up with a good defense at the end of it.
Yes, clearly that was the case because I believe he's went on to win a Shamrock Bowl. Is that correct?
Well, there was a kind of a couple of changes there. We've jumped ahead a little bit. So,
sorry.
It's so 2005. I played my last game for Cork, and then I was the defensive coordinator under the head coach Paul Orr, another great guy who was big on education. But before the start of the season, he had to leave Cork for work. So I was the what would you say, the part or the temporary interim head coach of the Admirals for the 2006 season. And that was a fantastic team. It was really competitive. And we, in that year, had our first winning season, over 500. And we beat some teams, as I spoke to you about already, some teams that were out of reach earlier on in our early games. We were no competitive against those and beating some of those. So that was fantastic. And then they decided to look for have a sort of a, which is understandable. They wanted to, you know, approach the permanent head coach position fairly, and they had a process and they selected somebody else to be the head coach of the team at that point. So we had a youth team at that stage. So I just worked with the youth team for 2007. And in late 2007, I was approached by the University of Limerick, who just won a Shamrock Bowl against Cork to coach their defense. So I went to Limerick to coach at the University of Limerick Vikings, and I coached their defense in 2008. We won a really great Shamrock Bowl, and I was the head coach in 2009. We won a Shamrock Bowl there, and in 2010 we won a European Championship.
Wow.
Yep. So we set records for defense, offense, and special teams, and we got to finals up to my last year there was 2012, and we lost a heartbreaking final to a great Trojans team from Belfast. And at that stage, then I stepped aside from club football.
And that Limerick team, then, obviously, to win that many years in a row and win a European title, that's obviously, you know, a pretty special team. Was there anything that stuck out with that team, or was it just, you know, the sum of all parts was just greater than others?
Well, like, Limerick, as you know, is a fantastic sporting town, and University of Limerick itself. I mean, Munster Rugby were training there. That's when Munster were winning Heineken Cups or European Championships as well. The whole place was just alive with sport, and these guys were just imbued with it. Like, they grew up with it. They grew up with rugby, hurling, Gaelic football. They were tough athletes. They played hard. Training was really tough. They played a very physical brand of American football, and we're proud of that. Nobody liked to play a game in Limerick. Nobody liked to travel to Limerick to play games. Nobody liked it when we traveled to play them. It was type of football that I kind of watched when I lived up in Maine. You know, it was that hard-nosed, hard-hitting football. I just loved it, and the guys were fantastic. We had a great working relationship between the whole coaching and players and senior players contributing, and it was like catching lightning in a bottle, really, for about 4 or 5 years. It was just electric, and you know, set down some pretty high markers for the kids who were coming in and joining every year. One of the great things about being in the university was there was always a fresh class of rookies coming in every September, every October, you know, and when you had a structure there to get the best out of them, some of these guys went on to be some of the best players, and still are some of the best players in the country. Some of them are still on my national team. So it was fantastic. Great times in Limerick.
That must be pretty special then to, you know, see them starting off as basically rookies, as you call them, and then ending up on the national team still to this day. That must be pretty special.
Oh, look, there was one open day, tryout day in Limerick, and I remember I was up in there was a bar, kind of coffee restaurant, cafe overlooking the field. And I remember looking down and seeing a kid in a Larry Fitzgerald jersey, and there was no pads involved. They were just throwing a ball around, and he was catching absolutely everything. And I remember saying to one of the other coaches that I wanted Larry Fitzgerald. I didn't know his name. I didn't know who he was. Never met him before. And, you know, he's gone on to be like the best receiver, you know, in the country. He's plays for me, starts for me, scored touchdowns for the national team at receiver to this day, and I still think of him as Larry Fitzgerald. So yeah, it's a journey to see guys come along and watch as they develop as players and kind of grow up as well. It's fantastic.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. We'll skip on then to, so you stopped with University of Limerick. We'll move on then to, so how did you basically get involved with the Irish national team?
So 2013 was the year of the gathering. Notre Dame Navy were playing a game up in the Aviva in Dublin. There was a football, festival of American football organised around that, where high school and Division 3 colleges were coming over to play games on the Friday before the big Notre Dame Navy game. These would have been competitive football games in their own leagues. So somebody gave up home field advantage. And I think there were 12 teams, 6 games came over. But they organised another team to come from Manitoba in Canada to play against the Bristol Academy from the UK. And this Canadian team wanted a warm-up game on the the Wednesday before that. And they just asked our league if we could put out, obviously these were younger players in kind of high school age group. And they asked if we could put out a national team to play against them. And I got a call from the head coach who was selected for that position, John Judge, asking me if I could put an offense together in 3 weeks. That was the lead time we had for it. So I kind of said, like, you know, it's going to be a tough ask, but I just said, look, yeah, I'll do it. I just need to be able to pick my own coaches. I picked a team of guys to coach the offense. We had, I think it was 4 sessions with the kids before we got to play the Canadians, and we won. We beat the Canadians, which is the first time an Irish team, and the only time an Irish team, had ever beaten a North American team of any description, or an overseas team for that matter. And that was kind of a massive impetus for the national program then.
And so at that stage, you're saying that you were putting together the offense. So I know you were a head coach at UL.
Yeah.
So what was your experience? Were you very much involved in the offense, or did you have a certain coach that you relied on for that, or what was your knowledge like of the offense at that stage?
Yeah, it's a good question, because my transition to offense was in my last year in Limerick. The offense previous to that hadn't been functioning, And there were some people who moved on and graduated and so on. So I saw that as an area that needed attention. And we had a much younger team with a lot less experience. So I made a decision to go with the offense. No, before it sounds like I'm kind of being a dictator about it and pushing around. Every year that I was at the University of Limerick, the club rules say that you have to put yourself forward for election for the post of head coach. It's renewed every year. So I would have had to put it to the team at that point, that we need to freshen up the offense. And I told them the style of offense we were going to play, which was a very high school, college-based offense called the flex bone. And I introduced that in my final year at Limerick. And it still remains the highest scoring offense in the league to this date. So we ran it. We had 8 plays that went right and left, so 16 plays in total. Not very complicated, but very tough to defend against. And I had styled it, coming at it from a defensive point of view. I knew where the weaknesses were in defenses, and I decided that this was the style we needed to play and tailored it then to the Irish game. So that's kind of where it came from. And when I went into the national program, that's the offense that I carried forward then. So it wasn't as strange as it might have first sounded. How did a defensive guy who coached some of the best and meanest defenses in the country end up coaching the offense on a national team? It was a transition we made with the Vikings, and successfully. We ran.
Yeah, because in my research of you, it's before you became head coach, obviously the national team, you were the offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
So, kind of in basic terms, obviously transitioning from an offensive coordinator to a head coach. What are the main differences? Obviously, basic the offensive coordinator decides what offenses that they run, but how much power over that do you have as the head coach? Can you overrule, or is that not accepted? Or
well, like when I was brought in, so the conversation I would have had with the head coach, Coach Judge, would have been, he picked me. He saw the type of offense I ran in Limerick, so it wasn't an uneducated. I wasn't all of a sudden turning around and going, "Oh, this is the type of offense I'm going to play." No, it was a kind of a continuation of what I'd been doing. He liked what he saw. It suited the younger age group we were playing with, under 20s. It's a very fast and speedy and deceptive type of offense that's very good against more powerful defenses. So he made a very good and conscious decision about that. So my current offensive coordinator, again, was selected, as part of a conversation. It's a discussion. This is what I like to see. I knew what he did. I pointed out the elements of what I liked from him, and sort of, once you pick somebody who the style of football they're going to bring, that then the offense they're going to bring to the table, then it's a case of just tailoring it for specific games or game situations, what you like to see in situations, and how you would use it is where the head coach would kind of come into play a bit more.
Okay, so so you started with the national team. Was this something that you wanted, Ciaran, setting out? Did you have a goal, like, I wanted to be involved with a national team, I wanted to be the head coach of this national team, or is this just something that kind of happens just because of how the games turn out?
Well, I wanted to, if I'm going to be completely honest, I really wanted to referee football, and I did a bit of refereeing along the way, and even as a coach, I'd referee in other leagues and referee other games that I wasn't involved in and so on. But I kind of became because I wanted to see football, I became a coach. I was a coach in other sports, and I took to it, and I just loved coaching from there on. So it was I never set out to be a football coach, and then I never set out to be a head coach, and I never set out to be a national team coach. But kind of my ambition grew with my coaching career, if you like. It became the obvious next step open to me, was to move on. So another obvious step that I took was to become a coaching tutor with Sport Ireland, where I train other coaches to become coaches. I train people to become American football coaches as well. So they're kind of just, there's a pathway there, and I'm lucky enough that I've been able to follow that pathway. And as I got up onto the next step, the step ahead of me, became my next ambition, if you like.
I suppose we'll start with the national team. So how often does the national team meet, and how often do they train? Obviously, there's a certain season. So when does that start? And can you talk us through that, please?
Yeah, so the national team, it depends. So if we're in a championship cycle, you would have more intensive training closer to the championship games. So our season here, our club season, would start in March around St. Patrick's Day. We'd play through to the start of August at when the Shamrock Bowl winds up everything. And the international season is generally played from the end of August through to the end of October. So you could have various like friendlies, or if, as I said, if it's a championship year, you'd find it at that end of the season. So what I decided to do was, with the national program, was to hold training sessions during the season. So our club games are played on a Sunday. We would train on a Saturday. I would hold 4 or 5 one-day camps at the National Sports Campus up in Blanchardstown. And that would be just like a sort of installing different elements of offense, defense, and special teams, while at the same time looking at a large squad. So we'd start in session 1 with maybe 70 or 80 players, and with a view to whatever game we had or whatever games we had lined up in September, October, whittling down and fine-tuning everything that we're ready to go at the very end. So we get through these sessions. They'd be designed to be run during the season, so they wouldn't impact on a player's ability to participate with his club, because club football is, what it's all about here, really, to be honest. And so then when the Shamrock Bowl ends, by nature, we'd have a lot of people involved in that, because we're picking the best players. They'd usually end up on the better teams and end up competitive in semi-finals and finals of our top division. And we'd give them a couple of weeks break and then start running more intensive sessions in the weekends leading up to our games.
Can you explain, sorry, Ciaran, what you mean by championship cycle?
So there's European championships that take place now. Everything is up in a heap at the moment, but so you'd have qualifiers which would have taken place last year. We weren't entered into those because we're very new as an international federation. So we weren't entered into those. The plan was for us to enter into the qualifiers in 2021. So their qualifiers in 2021 would be for the championships in 2022. So it's over a kind of a 2-year period that you have your qualifier and then your championship.
And is there tiers to this, or is it all of Europe?
Well, it's pretty much all Europe, but it is divided into 2 tiers. So you'd have an A and a B federation, and the winner of B would play in the A would get pushed up to the A championship then the following year. So if you qualify at the top of A, the top of B, then you move up to. We would be entering the B tier, and we'd be competitive at that level.
And who are the big boys in the A division? Who are the best teams?
Oh, look, you've got teams from like Great Britain. The Italians always had a strong team, but you've got Germany, you've got the Scandinavian countries. Poland were really strong for a while. As I said, Scandinavia is a massive American football culture up there, and Germany as well. So, I mean, Germany, I don't know if you can remember, but there was an NFL Europe for a time, and that all ended up, it was for a while spread around Spain, Holland, UK, with Scotland and London, and it all ended up going back into a kind of a German-based league for a while, for a couple of years. So Germany's got a massive following, and they will be at a completely different level altogether to most teams in Europe.
And when you say a different level, so is that physicality? Is it play calling? Is it just knowledge of the game? What separates them?
Well, it's kind of infrastructure. Starts with the infrastructure and works up. So they would have professional coaches. They would professional, just because you're getting paid for something doesn't mean you're better than anybody else. But they would have professional structures that these people would be able to dedicate time. They'd have professional players playing for them. So we're dealing with, people on the Irish national team or people on Irish club teams would have jobs as well as football and families as well as football. But when you're getting paid to do something and it's your number one commitment, it leaves you a lot more time to work out intricacies. They can control kind of fitness levels. They can deal with injuries. It's basically football at a professional level. Which when it comes to the international game, then they've got that foundation across Germany, the GFL, that they can put out really strong national teams.
Very good. And who's the countries that would be in the B conference with yourselves?
Well, we'd have sort of Israel are there, Spain, Belgium, Holland. It varies. Some of the people kind of move between the two groups. Hungary. So yeah, it's they're not small federations, and they're by no means inferior. One of the things you have to remember when you get to the international thing is it's kind of, the color of your jersey is not dictated by money or anything else. You play for your country. So Germans are just fortunate that they've got a fantastic infrastructure in their country, and we're all working up to try to get to that level. So there would be players in all those countries and all those national teams, including ours, that will play in German and Scandinavian leagues professionally. Irish-born players, Irish players with Irish passports, getting paid to play American football. It's fantastic.
Yep, it sounds like a pretty good deal to me. Obviously the travel involved with all this, and it's not cheap. So how is this? Is the team? How is the team funded? Is it mainly sponsors? Is it how does that work?
Well, our general manager, Alan Orr, so he's probably sponsored by some ulcer medication or something, because he basically takes that headache on board. And we've got a commercial director in the association as well, and they'd be responsible for getting sort of the best prices, getting the finances. And of course, the association, American Football Ireland, are fantastic in their support of this program. So we make it, cost neutral for the players traveling, and that's not easy to do when your squad size is 45 players and between 12 and 15 coaches, and then a back room of about 3 or 4 people as well. So when we travel, it's kind of like a small army taking off, and all the equipment as well that goes with it. So all those shoulder pads and helmets and so on, they all have to go too. And it's quite a sight to see it in action, but the logistics of it is serious, and the cost of it, we've been lucky to have great sponsors and great support from the likes of Ryanair and Clon Hospitality, and other sponsors who help out in any way they can. But that's not an easy market to be in. A lot of people are vying for sponsorship and partnership and support. We're just lucky with the people we have who track this down for us and keep us on the road.
Yeah, exactly. I just wanted to bring it back to for a second. The training squad of 70 or 80 players. How is that picked? Do you go around and watch games? Is it do teams nominate certain players that they think should go up, or how has that worked?
Well, our coaches, as I said, we've got a big coaching staff, so they'd be either involved in teams themselves, club teams, so they'd be getting to their games, seeing opponents, seeing players on their own team. I get to as many games as I can every weekend, basically. In season, I'm on the road, taking notes, looking for people. These guys basically select themselves by their performance with their club, and it doesn't matter what club they're with. You can see quality players; they stand out, and it's getting tougher now because people are getting more athletic and they're getting more educated, and the level of coaching in the clubs is improving. But we're still looking for, as that general standard rises, we're looking for the person who puts their head above that high watermark again and pushes the barrier again. So that's our primary way of finding people. We just ran a combine in Dublin before all of this shutdown took place, where we allowed people to actually just come forward, put them, register, show up, and get scientifically measured in some, the same measurements they'd use in NFL combines and so on. Scientific measurement of your 40, your 10 split, vertical, horizontal, so on. And the plan with that is to take those guys. We also measured some of the current squad, and if any of the guys who aren't with us at the moment exceeded the current squad numbers, we would then look for footage from them. That's how most selections are made across Europe. Would be people get highlight reels together. There's an awful lot of filming of games, and so the initial thing would be, are they fit enough? Then we'll have a look at their footage, and then we'll have a look at, when we get back to business, we'll have a look at them in action with their teams and speak to their coaches, and hopefully add some new talent, some new blood to our team. We've been doing it anyway. We played games in the autumn of 2018 and another game in 2019. Between those two games, we had 23 new players on the field. So that was a turnover of over half the players. Half the squad had changed. So we're constantly looking for the guys who just push boundaries and excel,
Yeah, and it's a good problem to have if the base level keeps getting higher and higher. It's a nice for you to have that issue. I will start with a few questions. Oh, sorry, one more question before I get into the Twitter questions. The squad you have, is it mostly Irish, like Irish players, or is there a lot of kind of foreign-born players that have come over and are on the team?
Mostly Irish-born players. So there's no exclusion. It's just that's how it works out. We do have some players who would have been born elsewhere and played here. We've very few players who would come to us sort of because they're active in Europe and qualify for sort of the Jack Charlton grandmother rule or whatever. We wouldn't have that. Like, most of the guys in our squad would have played with clubs in Ireland. It's not exclusive, but they know what football is like, and are kind of we are an island after all. And it's not like let's say in Europe where it's very easy for a guy from Belgium to play for a French or German team. They can move around very easily, so we don't get that sort of movement that you'd see in Europe. But yeah, it's primarily homegrown talent.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, it's always good to hear. Right, we'll start with some of the questions from Twitter. So one of them was, like, how do you devise trainings? Is there support and coaching supplied from the NFL? And also, do you take any aspects from other sports and include that in your training?
Yeah, so as I said, we are part of Sport Ireland. So all of our coaches would have been put through Coach Ireland approved training courses. So they, they kind of evolved our coaching and were impacted highly by other sports. But again, coaching in American football, this is where, again, I'm going to sound a bit arrogant, but the stuff that coaches are doing now in rugby and in Gaelic games, and just, things that they're calling innovations by Jim Gavin or Joe Smith, these things were being done in the 50s and 60s in America. So we're getting used now to seeing our coaches with screens in front of them, with headphones, with video footage, breaking down video for their players. Even at club level, we're seeing it now in other codes. That was happening at all levels of football in the States in the 1950s and 60s. So by nature, American football has probably impacted how other sports train more than any other sport. It's given structures, how training happens, and we do take, but at the same time, we're not in a position to exclude anything else. So some of the new tackling techniques that have come in relation to concussion and injury and so on have come from rugby. So we've borrowed from rugby, which is almost like a sister sport of ours anyway. You know, and then you would look at how other people train. As I said, when I was in University of Limerick, there was so much going on with athletics, with rugby down there, the GAA training, all in these big complexes, and you'd always be looking for ideas and looking for inspiration from other codes and other coaches.
Yeah, it's great to hear that. You know, a lot of coaches can be quite pig-headed and believe that their way is the only way. So it's great to hear, you know, the national coach of a sport always open to suggestions and always looking for better ways to do stuff. So that's always positive to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Another one here is, how has the game progressed since you've been involved? So from your early days at the Cork Admirals to now, what has been the biggest change you've seen?
Probably, I've mentioned it already. We're not getting players anymore. We're getting athletes. Everybody's into a gym culture. That would have been the exception, sort of at our level of the sport, when I was playing. So, you know, you could spot the guys who went to the gym. No, it's completely the opposite. You can spot the guys who don't go to the gym. Fitness, diet, it's all improved. The players we're getting now would be competitive on other teams for other sports. You know, they'd be of a higher level. It's an option for people now to play American football. So when the Admirals came in, they were the 4th club team in Ireland. So they were the 4th club team playing American football in Ireland at that time. We have 24 now all over the island. So there's been massive changes, and but the one that I love is just our athletes are stacking up against athletes in other sports at the top level, and also, as I said, they can go and play in Europe. They stack up against European and American athletes of the same age. They look after themselves. They love the game, and it's just fantastic to see.
Yeah, another, just to touch on that. So, is the knowledge of the sport getting better as well from the players who are starting? You know, I'd imagine back when the Cork Admiral days, there was players coming to you that didn't know much about the game, they didn't know much about the rules. Has that changed? Are people coming now much more informed about the sport?
Absolutely. So, think about this: that we would have had players, and this would have been common for a lot of club teams in Ireland at the time. We would have players who the first American football game they'd seen was a game they were playing in.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
That wasn't unusual. So, there was just, at that time, we were lucky. It was really taking off. The Sky Sports coverage was getting there. Madden was taking off as a platform. The internet, the availability of ESPN online and Game Pass packages and so on, and all these fantastic documentaries. So, if you want to, you can just log onto a website and see how Ohio State train their offensive line, what defensive backs are doing for Green Bay in the off season, how they prepare. And the guys who are into football, they eat that stuff up. They love it. So they're coming to us. And what it does to us as coaches is it drives us on, because we have to satisfy that expectation. So they're coming to us with an expectation, and they see, how technically people are being coached, and we have to be providing them with that level of training. So we have to push ourselves as coaches then.
Do you ever wonder about, if you started, if you were 21 years old now and you started in your coaching career, do you ever wonder about, maybe, how would that be different from when you started back in the 80s or 90s?
Well, if I was 21, Stephen, I'd be focusing on my playing career and getting the big bucks.
Well, that's true. Yeah, true.
Really early there. It's exciting for coaches now. It is very exciting for coaches now. There's what we've done with the national program has put Irish football on the map in Europe for the first time. So, we have coaches and players who are, being courted by teams from across Europe. I was lucky enough to be offered a couple of coaching positions in my time, but having travelled already when I was younger, I wasn't kind of keen to uproot, as you say. If I was 21 and offered a coaching job, yeah, I'd probably snap your hand off. But you have to understand what a coaching job entails in American football. It's not as glamorous as it sounds. You start at the very bottom of a hierarchy. You're reliant on the people above you to keep your job. So if the head coach goes, the coaching staff pretty much goes. If the offensive coordinator goes and you're working under him, the offensive staff generally tends to go. So it's a fickle job to have, and the commitment levels, if you'd be working 2 and 3 a days in colleges or pro teams, and if there's a meeting at 7 o'clock, you're in the building at 5:30 setting it up. So, and you're the last person to leave and you're breaking down footage. It's really is an intensive profession, and I've seen it firsthand. And the work, the finished product that you'll be familiar with in the NFL, if you were to break down the number of coaching hours that goes into the simplest looking play, kicking a field goal even, something that happens after every touchdown that we take for granted. If you see the amount of coaching work that would go into that, the hours and hours and hours every week, not just at the start of the season, it's intense. It's absolutely intense. And not many people are up for that challenge, if you like. And you definitely have to be younger than me coming into it. So you'd see where somebody maybe from a college player who'd graduate might move into coaching, as you said, in that kind of 21, 22 age group, and then work your way up through the ranks. It's a long, hard slog, and it does pay off for some people, but for an awful lot more, it just continues to be a long, hard slog.
I'm sure sometimes it can feel like a thankless job, all right, especially in the older days when it wasn't as popular.
No, yeah, and everybody wants to shoot you down, and that's the other thing about all the probably the downside of all the media now is that there's an awful lot more opinions out there, and there's a queue of people. We see it in all sport where the analysis gets kind of very critical, if you like, and every little detail is picked over.
But that's so. Have you seen any media coverage of people like who don't know much about the sport? I'm sure that you've come across that, where someone who's just covering the sport has been given this task to cover, American football, maybe for some media outlet that isn't used to it. Have you come across some ridiculous statements?
Not particularly. It's more like they're kind of reporting as consumers instead of journalists, Yeah, and you will see that from time to time. So you see people who would have an understanding of the game as it's fed to us, as we see it, just as a civilian, if you like, watching on a Sunday evening, and they're kind of feeding back on that. But if you compare that to the people who take the time to go to practices, to talk to coaches, to find out what's happening in organizations, there's a huge difference. And I think the American football game and American sports are different in that these journalists get embedded in the sport, and we don't see that in Irish or English or European sports so much. So GA inter-county teams are pretty much closed shops with very little access to the outside. But, after big games, you will see journalists in the locker rooms in the NFL. It's a different thing, and it's very hard for European journalists to kind of bridge that gap and to give that level of coverage, to be fair as well. These guys are they're at practices, they're on the phone to coaches, they're on the phone to players, agents. They're getting really deep into the workings of these clubs, and we don't see that level of coverage, and it's starting to creep into the Premiership, maybe, with a lot of people talking about agents now becoming a factor in covering Premiership games. That was never there before. But in the American game, it's all about that. in the NFL, it's the press are right in there. It's a product. It's part of the rules of the game that the press have access, and you can see the difference in the level of coverage that these sports get compared to our own sports here in Ireland, or, as I said, soccer across Europe.
Yeah, and media can be good and can be bad, but there's no denying that it helps get your product out there to more people. People, you don't have to necessarily agree with what they're saying, but still, it's some would call it a necessary evil.
Well, if you saw what our own experience here in Ireland, what Johnny Giles and Eamon Dunphy bought soccer analysis, that kind of did catapult it and was part of the general growth of sort of the national team, and even European football before we got the Sky access and so on. So I mean, yeah, it's starting off here, but again, the level of controversy can be fairly high, and it can be hard to take, I guess, when you're on the inside. But it's part of the game now, and you have to as you say, the benefits of being talked about as opposed to not being talked about at all. That weighs heavily on everybody's mind. Everybody'd rather be somewhere in a report, in a paper, on TV, or on social media than just being ignored.
Yeah, well, as the old saying goes, there's no such thing as bad publicity at the end of the day. So we've been talking obviously about the higher leagues and the higher levels of the sport in Ireland. Just touching on the lower levels, because in Galway here, obviously the Galway Warriors play, and I went to one of their games last year, and I was shocked by the amount of organisation that goes into the games. Again, me just being quite naive, I just showed up expecting just a game of football to be participating, but there's an ambulance there ready to go if necessary. You have to get referees in from other teams to come and play, referee the game. And I've one of my regular guests on the podcast here, Sam, used to play with them last year or the last couple of years, but the Galway team this year now, it doesn't look like they have enough numbers to participate. So the DV8 league that kind of got had a brief existence in Ireland, which is what you touched on earlier on, which is kind of like the 8v8.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a good format for maybe lower league teams that can build it up maybe and then progress on to more maybe full teams?
Well, I got to be honest. Like, I was the development officer who created the DV8 league, so
that's a good segue. So
yeah, not a bad segue, not a bad point. Look, I just think if we use American language, I just think there are markets here that can't support an 11-a-side team. And I know you're only talking about 3 players, but that multiplies out, when you're looking at the different types of players that are required for the 8-a-side game. So you don't need as many offensive linemen. You don't need as, it kind of does suit the smaller markets a lot more. I would have liked to have seen the DV8s kept on for sort of rural areas, if you like. And I'm not calling Galway City small by any standards, but just the market isn't there for the game at the moment in the 11-a-side format. And I've always been an advocate of the 8-a-side game. It's literally, it was designed at the time to bring newer clubs like when we were the Admirals ourselves, and it was based on my experience. How do we make it easier for clubs to get a foothold in the community? And you need games, and if you're waiting to get a 30-odd man roster so you can play an 11-a-side game, then you might be waiting 2 or 3 years with no competition or no meaningful competition, and that allowed that. But some other federations across Europe have taken it on board as a format for either their youth football or, as I said, for rural smaller towns, and they're still operating with it. And I think it's something we need to look at here. If we're going to break into definitely into Connacht and realistically into parts of Munster, it'd be very hard for somebody to start a team at the moment in Kerry. There isn't a history of a team there, and they would need that sort of buffer zone of 8-a-side football, and they might end up playing 8-a-side football for a long time. and it's an exciting format as well. It's a good format to watch. It's there's a lot more action in it, and it's enjoyable. It's a good product. Yeah.
Yeah, well, a good example of it is in women's, Gaelic football. There, they went to nine-a-side, for teams. A lot of towns wouldn't have full, numbers for a women's football team, so they
Yeah.
dropped it down to nine-a-side, and teams can then participate. And then, nothing attracts, people who are on the fence about joining a team like a team that's playing regularly and winning. So I think, yeah, like you said, even if you got an eight-a-side team here, going in Galway, it'll attract more people. Because if it's, no one wants to just train and don't want to play games. Everybody wants to play games at the end of the day. That's the whole point.
And
So I think, yeah, you're right.
we train an awful lot for the games that we do play. So we train. Our clubs would train. The league season is 8 games, but we would, they'd be in training from October right through to the end of the season if it's June, July, or August, and 2 and 3 times a week. So that's an awful lot of training for, training to game ratio is necessarily. I mean, I'm not complaining about it. So if you're training like that and you're not playing any games, that's really tough. And then it's hard to get a foothold in the community, as I said. So, the Warriors, they've been working really hard over, geez, I don't know how many years now, 6-7 years maybe, and longer even. And, just establishing that foothold is really tough up there. And again, like Limerick, it's got a great sporting tradition. You've got your Connacht rugby, the GAA is fantastic up there. There's no reason why you shouldn't have a football team, an American football team for sure, but maybe, revisiting the format again. And as I said, there are other clubs out there who'd either be starting off clubs or clubs who should be probably eight-a-side, depending on their location. It's an easier format, and I'd love to see football up in Galway again.
Do you think you make a point there about Kerry and there's no real football down there in Galway? These are, you mentioned 2 massive GAA counties, and obviously with Connacht Rugby as well based in Galway. Do you think that doesn't help either? You know what I mean? You have Kerry obviously is GAA. That's king down there. It's tough probably to get players to stop playing those sports and come over. Have you experienced much of that in your coaching career where you have players and you want them, but they just won't give up maybe Gaelic, whether it be soccer or rugby?
No, I think as I said, football is becoming a real option, but it's got to be on the menu. I mean, you can't turn around to a kid in Kerry and say, look, who wants to play American football, and say, look, that's great, but you got to travel up to Cork or Limerick to play your games. There are guys out there, but it's kind of a horse and cart or chicken and egg scenario, which comes first, the team or the interest in it. And, the guys you want to be recruiting into the team aren't the guys who should necessarily be starting the team. You want old guys like me to set up a team and run it for you. But the driver for that is generally coming from player age group who are sort of in the late teens, early 20s. They want to play American football. They might necessarily have the skill set or that be driven to set up a team and set up coaching and so on. It's tough, but again, if you as a development officer for the association, like when in my time, it was about tailoring a product to those areas and trying to expand it out, push it out, and make it workable for them. So the eight-a-side format didn't require goalposts because there was no special teams, there was no kicking in the game. So it was pure offense versus defense. And, that opened up a whole bunch of venues, and, GA clubs and soccer clubs and rugby clubs were willing to give areas that they would consider their training areas. It was a smaller pitch, it required less marking. Traveling, you required a smaller bus to be practical about it. It just made it workable. And I think areas, like looking at people coming from other codes, we've had that. So we'd have had people involved in, inter-county teams. We'd have had people involved in sort of rugby academies and so on, who come to our sport as well. It's just about giving them the option, a realistic option, to get into a setup that, as you say, gives them their games. gives them a purpose for the training, and allows them to play a sport that they've seen on television and are really taken by it. Like.
Yeah, no, that's some good points. Right, second last question, Ciaran. So, where do you see the sport going in the next few years? Obviously, it's come on leaps and bounds in the last couple of years. So, in 5 years' time, what's the goal personally? Obviously, with the Irish team, and then where do you also see the sport in Ireland? Where do you see it continuing to grow?
Okay, so personally, obviously, eventually getting into the A group for qualifying in Europe would be a goal. So, I spoke about steps on the way to that, and the step on is to get into our first qualifying group and to be successful and to push on to build on the foundation we've laid. So, sort of that's where I see the Wolfhounds going. The growth that we've had in the program, the growth that we've had in the player group, the commitment level that we have, and our reputation and the type of football we play in Ireland lends itself to that being a realistic objective. We're very much known as one of the most physical teams you will encounter. When you get a reputation like that in a physical sport, that's something you can build on. That reputation is not given out lightly. So that's where I see us going as a program, the Wolfhounds. Just getting bigger and better and imposing ourselves on other people as much as we can. Where I see the sport going, couple of places I'd like to see it going. As I said, there are massive opportunities. There's so many great sporting counties out there and communities out there that as the game is growing and on our media and our access to it is growing, there's an obvious market there. So I would like to see a rural or a native side set up for developing new teams, and also, it doesn't necessarily just have to be a stepping stone. It can actually be a level of competitive football for some communities, which, I don't see a way of getting, let's say, a town like Tralee or Killarney realistically putting out, a 40-man roster of American football players to be competitive in an 11-a-side game. That's not realistic to me. 8-a-side would be. And the other area, which is a huge one for me, is women in sport. I think other sports are coming on in leaps and bounds in terms of women in sport, and we have the president of AFI is Orla McAleese, fantastic president. She was a general manager with the national team before that. We've got some fantastic officials. We've got coaches, but I think it's getting there now that we should have a platform for women who want to play American football. There's definitely an interest, but hopefully we'll be able to drive that interest at some level. And it would take imagination, and it would take innovation to make it happen initially, and to get maybe the people who are interested. You're not going to get strongholds of them big enough to set up individual teams all over the country. But in the UK, they did a very interesting thing where they were able to bring joint training sessions in different locations, and then all the players would come together and be divided into teams to play blitzes to start with. And that's after pushing on, and they're after building a national team out of it. And that's somewhere we need to go as a federation, and it's somewhere we need to go as a sport as well, to be honest.
Yeah, no, definitely. You make some good points there, Ciaran. Again, like you say, if there's interest, I suppose that's a great start, but there needs to be, an outlet for it as well. So, hopefully that happens in the next few years. A final question then, Ciaran. So obviously this come in from Twitter as well. How do we continue then as supporters of the sport and fans of the sport? How do we continue to grow the game in Ireland? What's the best steps for us?
Well, like the American Football Ireland Facebook page, or the website itself is probably the best thing. And you've been to a game, so one of the things that you'll notice, it's the same whenever we get visitors to Ireland and you take them to a hurling game, for instance. It doesn't matter what level the hurling game is. You definitely get a sense of the physicality and the contest and competitiveness of it, being on the sideline of any hurling match. And it's the same with American football. Everything looks so clinical and clean in the very shiny American stadiums, and these athletes, if you stand on the sideline of a game and somebody's tackled within 5 meters of you, you actually feel it. The noises of the game, like the noises of a hurling match, are amazing. It's contact everywhere. It's helmets clashing. It's it's like its own little battle happening. It's an immersive experience. So it's one of the things we don't do well here across the board. I'd say we don't get out to watch enough local sports. And if anybody has an opportunity to travel to one of our league games, I'd highly recommend it. And
on that note, Ciaran, where are the home games for Ireland actually?
Navan.
Played?
We play in Navan at present, so that's our home ground now. We are in talks with other grounds, and as I said, our general manager is always looking for opportunities. So it's Navan Rugby Club will be our home ground at present. That kind of suits us logistically, and it keeps us to a level. But if you ask the people who travel to watch us play there, it's a fantastic experience for everybody except the visiting team and visiting fans. It's just to be. I'm even getting excited, and it's a pity I can't go watch a game this weekend. But one of the things I love about my excuse to go and see games is to be the coach of the national team. So I can justify jumping in a car at 5 o'clock in the morning and driving up to Belfast, or I can justify driving up to Dublin or to Limerick to watch a game of a Sunday, and my whole day revolves around it. But just standing on the sideline and experiencing it firsthand. Imagine if the only hurling game you ever saw was on television. That'd be a very clinical experience, and for a lot of American football fans here in Europe, the only games they see are on television, and it's a million miles away from their experience of other sports. So what I say is, look, get in touch with the game at its grassroots level, and go out there and see the game and see what it's like, and talk to the players. We're a very open community and a very welcoming community, and anybody who shows an interest, if you want to see what it's like to throw on a pair of shoulder pads, and people aren't precious about that, you'll be welcome to any game.
Yeah, I hope you're getting mileage for that trip up to Belfast. That's a long old haul for you, but that's you made some great you made some great points there, Ciaran. Actually, definitely. I myself now, I definitely want to get to an Ireland game. Hopefully, whenever they start up again. Because as I said, I've been to a Warriors game, but to go see a national game, I think is definitely on my to-do list for. Maybe it'll probably be next year at this stage, will it, Ciaran, or are you hoping by the end of the year?
Look, the situation we're in at the moment, and I'm being honest about it, I'm just hoping that we come out at the other end of the experience that we're having at the moment, healthy and well, and whatever the sports organisations have to do to reorganise, that'll all be done. It's not a priority. I'm not even thinking about it. I just know that when the time comes, we'll have the players and the coaches to take on whatever challenges face us. But our big challenge now is a million miles away from the joy of a sports field, and that's for everybody involved in sport, in every sport. We're just miles away from that and thinking about it. It's lovely to talk to you about the game and to get excited about the games and get enthusiastic. And we've got to hold on to that enthusiasm and use it when the time is right.
Yeah, exactly. At the moment, play some Madden, and then that's probably the next best thing. I think, as you said, the best thing to do is go find the Facebook page,
Yeah.
look at websites for teams, and you'll see updates from then when, hopefully in the near future or whenever it happens, games will be kicking off again. So, Ciaran, that's for. Sorry, go ahead.
Can I just say, just an easy search to put in is Shamrock Bowl, Shamrock Bowl finals, and you'll find games, these finals on YouTube going back to, back when I was coaching, and you'll see footage there, and it might be a fun way for somebody to, to pass a couple of hours of the interminable isolation we're all going through. So, just get onto YouTube. There are games out there on YouTube that you can watch. At our level, there are the national team games will be out there. If you Google Wolfhounds and put it in there, you'll find national games for other federations and other teams. And, there's a whole world of sport out there, of American football. And, just a couple of Google searches will put you on the right path.
Yeah, exactly. Ciaran, thank you very much for this. I appreciate it. I think this has been very informative to anyone that's listening, who might be on the fence about the sport and might not, because it can be quite a daunting sport to get into brand new. So I think what you said this evening has really helped with that. So again, thank you very much for joining me this evening. Is there anything that you want to do, any socials you want to plug here? And I don't think you're on Twitter. I was trying to find you, but I don't think you're there, are you?
Just Google Irish Wolfhounds. You'll get to our Facebook pages, our website, American Football Ireland. We've got our own Facebook page as well. Social media spin-offs from that. We're across a lot of platforms. It's the information is out there, and if anybody wants to get a hold of me just on the American Football Ireland website or on the Wolfhounds website, there's web messaging there, and I'm always willing to answer questions, or if somebody has any questions or needs information, sure, just give us a shout.
Yeah, I can vouch for that, because I actually sent an email with regards to information about you, Ciaran, in my research. So I'd like to thank Paul McKillop, who responded promptly with some great information on the email. So again, thank you, Paul. That was great information that I got on you. So Ciaran, yeah, thanks very much. Appreciate the time, and hopefully I'll see you at a game in the near future.
I'm looking forward to it, Stephen. Thank you.
Thanks, Ciaran. Bye-bye.
Bye now.